Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our large group panel session on effective stakeholder engagement beyond a data reporting requirement. My name is Amy Bitterman and I am with the IDEA Data Center or IDC. If you could go to the first slide, please. And actually go ahead to the next slide. And one more. Thank you. So today's session, we're going to be focusing on innovative and effective ways to engage stakeholders, not just for the SPP APR target setting that so many states have traditionally done, but really going further and including stakeholders throughout the whole process from analyzing data to helping to plan and implement improvement strategies, program policy, progress evaluation. So this first hour, you'll hear from representatives from two TA centers, also from a Part C and a Part B state and a parent center. And we'll be sharing about how we're making data meaningful for stakeholders, especially parents, and also sharing strategies for supporting the engagement of stakeholders. And then for the last 30 minutes or so, the panel will be responding to the questions. So now I'm going to introduce our panel. As I mentioned, I'm Amy Bitterman. I'm a TA specialist from Westat and the IDA Data Center, and I'll be co-moderating our session today. And I'm joined by Michelle Lewis. She's a consultant for the Center for IDEA Early Childhood Data Systems, or DAISY, and also with New Hampshire's Parent Information Center. She's the executive director, and Michelle will be co-moderating the panel with me. Then we'll also hear from Lori Karcher, who is with the Wisconsin Family Assistance Center for Education Training and Support, which is an OSTEP-funded parent training and information center. We also are joined by Zelphine Smith-Dixon, the State Director for Special Education at the Georgia Department of Education, and John Van Overen, who is the Part C and Part B 619 Data Manager with the Minnesota Department of Education Early Learning Services Division. So just a note to please put any questions that you have throughout the presentations in the chat. We will be kind of waiting till that last 30 minutes or so to address questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we're able to. Next slide, please. So I'll be kicking things off today, talking very briefly initially about the changes in the new SPP APR federal fiscal year 2020 to 2025 package related to stakeholder requirements. I'll also share what we at IDC have been hearing from states about how they're planning and starting to implement those requirements around stakeholders in terms of involving them more broadly and collaboratively. And also I'll talk about a few resources that IDC has developed related to stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. So what we have here on this slide are just some of the new requirements that you'll find in the SPP APR package in the introduction. And really what came through with the new package related to stakeholder involvement is that there's a much stronger now emphasis and kind of a trying to change the mindset, I think, around stakeholders in several different ways. So one of those is ensuring that states are much more intentionally expanding and broadening who is included in these stakeholder groups. Often states will turn to their state advisory panels or their state interagency coordinating councils, but really going past and including many more other stakeholders and types of stakeholders, especially more parents. And that was really emphasized, I think, when we heard from Secretary Cardona during yesterday's plenary, really talking about how important it is to include family and student voice, which we all know. Secondly, these requirements focus on involving diverse stakeholders from across the state, looking at demographics, geographics, and also the types of stakeholders that are being included. And then third area that I wanted to highlight in these new requirements is really going beyond just involving stakeholders for the target setting activities every few years that states have often been doing, but really bringing them into the continuous cycle of developing, implementing, and evaluating activities to improve outcomes. And I think the states really feel like this is a great opportunity to create a new normal, like we heard yesterday from Cornelius Minor and the other panelists as well, in terms of stakeholder engagement in particular. And that the goal for stakeholder engagement really shouldn't just be, passing information in one direction to the stakeholders, kind of just checking that box off, but really engaging and having them be active participants in this authentic engagement. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've heard from states through our technical assistance work directly with individual states. And we also have a number of peer groups where we bring groups of states together and have had webinars as well around stakeholder engagement and got a lot of great feedback and hearing what states are doing right now. So one thing is in terms of making sure that there's diversity among the stakeholders, states are really working on that and trying to figure out what's the best way to identify stakeholders that are underrepresented and marginalized. And one thing OSEP has suggested that I think many states will probably do is looking at the representativeness data states already collect for indicators 8 and 14 and using that data to kind of help identify what groups do we really feel like have to be part of our stakeholder engagement in particular. Also, another big topic for states, I think, is wanting to make sure that the stakeholders have the capacity to really be able to partake actively and provide really meaningful, useful feedback. And part of that is making sure stakeholders are well prepared for the engagement. And we know a lot of states are making sure that prior to any meetings or any requests, making sure that they know the purpose, the intention, what the expectations are of this engagement. If it's related to the indicators, making sure that they understand the measurement, giving some of that background and context ahead of time. A number of states have developed videos, modules, PowerPoints that they share ahead of time and encourage stakeholders to try to kind of do some of that pre-work to be ready. And of course, the data, that's a huge struggle in some ways, but really, what the core of a lot of what is happening in terms of these stakeholder engagement activities is kind of built around. And trying to figure out how much data, what data, how to present the data to stakeholders so that we're not overwhelming them, we're not confusing them, but giving them yet enough information so they are informed and can make good recommendations. So kind of knowing to the extent possible how data savvy the stakeholders are before engaging them is always helpful. So you know the audience and know kind of what level of depth and detail and complexity to go into. That's always helpful. And really just trying to build the stakeholders' capacity to understand the data and become familiar with it and make those informed decisions. And we did all, have heard also from several states who've been really in the throes of their stakeholder engagement work and how surprised they were by the stakeholders really wanting to go deeper and wanting more data. So kind of they underestimated in some ways, but just, trying to strike that balance is always critical. And then also thinking about what data to share. For example, we know states have shared trend or historical data, also disaggregated by various subgroups and district level data. Depending on the data, if it's available for all students, looking at students with disabilities compared to students without disabilities or all students. And also we know a lot of states want to know, well, how am I doing, compared to other states or the nation overall? That's always something too that I think states like to take a look at in stakeholders. And then also in terms of how the stakeholder groups are organized, we know that the states themselves are sort of identifying, based on their knowledge of the stakeholders, what groups they represent, how familiar, they are with the data and the topics, and are kind of identifying what areas, if they're breaking kind of the groups, breaking the stakeholders up into certain groups or topics. And other states, interestingly, they're asking the stakeholders to identify which areas they feel like they should be focusing on, depending on their expertise. Also, some states have, a series of meetings with groups. Some states are having up to 30 to 40 stakeholder meetings. Some of those with multiple meetings might kind of have the first meeting or two really to set the stage, help prepare the stakeholders, to what they'll be doing, and then in subsequent meetings get into the discussion and the feedback and questions. Next slide, please. And of course, the ways that states are engaging stakeholders has varied quite a bit. We've been in a virtual environment for so long now, and many states are continuing that with their stakeholders, and it's somewhat to their advantage. In some ways, if you're trying to, you have a big state and you want to include, folks from across the state, using a virtual means to do that makes a lot of sense. We know some are doing in-person meetings now, some it's a combination, but it is a good idea to think about still using some of those virtual meeting tools, even if you are in person, because it really does help enhance the engagement that you'll see. And then in terms of the methods for convening the stakeholders and obtaining the feedback and having those discussions, some might do things in large groups, some might do larger groups and then break out into smaller groups. Other states we know are doing surveys or requesting more like written feedback. One state has developed a series of worksheets that they distribute to the stakeholders to complete during and after any meetings that they have that include data, guiding questions, space for notes, and also for feedback that they then submit back to the state after. So those are just some ideas. And really building on that theme of changing the status quo in education, but here specifically related to stakeholder engagement, we know that states are rethinking how stakeholders need to be active participants and involved, from the start all the way through, making sure that feedback loop is present so that there's continuous improvement. And also that accountability and transparency is there as well. Next slide, please. Okay, and I'm just going to wrap up now by talking a little bit about some of the supports that IDC has provided around stakeholder engagement. We have several data quality peer groups that we've had going on now for a number of months, and those are focused for different role groups in the state, data managers, SPP, APR coordinators, and so on. And for many months now, probably even over a year, stakeholder engagement has certainly been one of our primary topics. We also had a few webinars back earlier in 2021 on stakeholder engagement in the new SPP APR, and those recordings are available on our website, idadata.org. And we have several resources too, some of them developed at the request of states, probably all of them actually. One is, for example, a simple one-page document that just lays out the stakeholder requirements in the SPP APR. That's something states might want to share with their stakeholders so they know what's required of the state. We also have templates that states can use in order to capture the information that they're hearing and seeing during the stakeholder engagement, which is really important when it comes time to report in their SPP APR. And we are in the midst of developing even more resources related to stakeholder engagement. Okay, next slide, please. And here is my contact information if anyone would like to reach out, has questions, would like more information. And then now I will turn it over to Michelle Lewis with DAISY.
Thanks, Amy. I appreciate it. As Amy said, I'm Michelle Lewis, and I am a consultant on DAISY, which is the Center for IDEA Early Childhood Data Systems. So today, much like Amy, I'm going to talk a little bit about the DAISY Center. Hopefully you all know about the DAISY Center, but we'll talk about it briefly and really talk about how stakeholder engagement is woven throughout all aspects of the work of DAISY. And we'll talk about as well what we're hearing from states and also how we're responding to what the state's needs are related to stakeholder engagement around data. Next slide. So just to refresh people, the objectives for the DAISY Center, the first one is to improve states' capacity to collect, report, and analyze and use high quality data, both for IDEA Part C and IDEA Part B preschool data. And then the second piece is to enhance, streamline, and integrate statewide child level early childhood data systems, essentially to improve outcomes or results for the children served under Part C and Part B preschool special education programs. And what I want to highlight here is throughout all of DAISY's activities that support these two objectives is stakeholder engagement. And so your TA liaisons for the DAISY Center, if you have questions about stakeholder engagement related to any of the activities you're engaging in, they are a resource for you. Next slide, please. In terms of stakeholder engagement and IDEA, there's a lot of systems level pieces and that allow natural ways to partner. So we know that the responsibilities of IDEA Part C and Part B 619 systems level stakeholders may include partnering with those states' lead agencies. So we want to look at stakeholders can be very helpful in looking at programs, policies, procedures, collaborating with different groups that are out there to achieve that full participation across public and private agencies. And then certainly the monitoring the implementation of statewide systems of service and looking at those program quality. And this ties back to really looking at equity and representativeness that we've been talking about throughout this whole conference. And so just not only the requirements, but just IDEA itself really lends itself to looking at a variety and looking at data and looking at strategies through multiple stakeholder lenses. Next slide. But when we look at stakeholders, we have to remember that stakeholders have knowledge about a variety of data-related topics, but they also come with a variety of just knowledge in general. So this differing levels of knowledge, and I'll tie it back to something Amy had said earlier, is that we have to really look at how do we orient stakeholders to the data. And that's one of the themes we are seeing with states as well, because everybody's coming with a different level. And so on the slide here, you can see certainly different topics and different sets of expertise in terms of how data is used for decision-making, the different reporting requirements, privacy, confidentiality, and linking data to other programs. But the other aspect for stakeholders is helping people understand why data is important, because people have varied feelings about, quote, our data-rich culture. And so there's getting at kind of the why behind some of these things, which I think has been another theme that I have heard throughout this conference, and really taking a look at data analysis and representativeness and equity. And so we really need to understand when we're working with stakeholders that everybody's coming with a different knowledge base, but that all voices are important. Next slide, please. So this is it's now one of my favorite quotes, which is "Data don't drive." And at first when I heard this, I wasn't exactly sure, well, what do you mean? We always think about this data-driven culture, and we want to make sure that everything we do is data-driven. But when you really think about data, the data that we collect, analyze, and use is all driven by people. Because people set up data collection systems, people set up how we analyze, and people look at how it's going to be used. And so we really do need to think about data don't drive. It's everyone's voices that are important, because we as people come at it from our own biases and knowledge bases. And so we want to make sure that we take into account all types of voices, both people and representativeness across states and across the country, and when we're looking at data. So, and then on the slide as well, it says data is collected, interpreted, and acted on by people. So think about that when you hear the term data-driven. And I want to be clear, certainly we want to use the data. That's why we're here setting targets, looking at improvement strategies, but know that data doesn't tell the whole story. There are people and relationships behind that. Next slide, please. As I talked about a little bit earlier, woven in throughout DAISY is building capacity for stakeholder engagement related to data. So some of these key aspects is that DAISY is building the capacity of parent leaders to be active participants in state and local early childhood data conversations. And I'll talk in a couple of minutes about the collaboration with the parent centers, which is very important collaboration. And also supporting state agencies to build data capacity of stakeholders, including and especially parent leaders. So we have different resources and are in process of developing more ways that we can support state agencies to help build that data capacity. And again, working collaboratively with parent centers. Parent centers have a lot of resources related to stakeholder engagement and related to family engagement in particular, and working it together can really help engage diverse stakeholders. And then the fourth piece is developing critical questions related to equity in data, so that we can help when we're looking at the data teams or stakeholder teams can really look at it through representativeness or equity, or ask more critical questions to find out what more information is needed. Next slide, please. What we hear from states. We hear from states that they recognize and have always felt that stakeholder engagement is critical. And they're really taking into consideration how to actively engage stakeholders in informed data conversations. Much like Amy shared earlier, people are really thinking, okay, how can I do things potentially a little bit differently in terms of outreaching to diverse populations, and also to making sure that our stakeholder engagement is continuous and active, so those ongoing feedback loops. States are trying to also determine how to develop strategies to prepare stakeholders in the target setting process. And so it's, again, echoing what Amy's saying, like how much information is too much, how much is too little, how much do we need to know about the indicators? Again, people are coming with different levels of knowledge, not only about data, but also about the different indicators that are out there. States are also conducting data workshop for stakeholders. Many states are coordinating with their Parent Training and Information Center or Community Parent Resource Centers, so their parent centers, to identify families, conducting focus groups to really look at that target setting. They're also broadening the strategies to reach and include diverse stakeholders. And we're going to hear from states today, 2 states in particular, and a parent center who can talk some about how they are doing that. They're also needing support in identifying resources to broaden stakeholder engagement. And so they're using technology, they're using in-person, some aren't in person yet, and they're really trying to broaden and really look at those critical partners that are out there. I'd say the other theme we're hearing is from states is who can we partner with at not only the state level, but the local level. So to kind of move this work forward. Next slide, please. In terms of DAISY activities, I just want to go over just a couple, and I'm going to highlight one here at the end. But DAISY activities, there are multiples, and certainly not all are listed on these 2 slides. The first, we have a couple of outcomes cohorts, one for child outcomes and one in equity in the family outcomes cohort. And both require a diverse team, essentially a leadership team, to look at both child outcomes or equity within family outcomes. And many have family representatives on the team, as well as locals that are really moving the work forward from a stakeholder lens, and really valuing the different perspectives that the local, state, and family members bring. Certainly, we've been conducting joint presentations at state and national conferences on data culture and data leadership, emphasizing families and diverse stakeholders as essential partners and helping you really identify and move forward with representativeness as well as getting diverse feedback. Many of you may have attended the Improving Data, Improving Outcomes convening, and we had family leaders attend that meeting as part of a Part C or 619 state team. So that was really helpful in helping people look as a team. And as part of that, helping the family members who were coming to the conference, as part of that team, we conducted a role-alike session for family leaders that's looking at essential participation of family leaders in that shared leadership in Part C 619 programs. Next slide, please. The final two things I want to highlight, one is currently in the works, and it's the partnership with the Center for Parent Information and Resources, affectionately known as the CIPR, that's the National Parent Center, to develop and support parents as skilled data leaders. And so we at DAISY are providing training and support to 12 parent centers relating to building capacity of parent data leaders. And this will be a unique opportunity because it allows the parent centers to provide training, learn and then provide training to parents to be data leaders in the early childhood system, which will allow you as states to actually access and partner with your parent center, and they will have ready-made data leaders with the support of the parent centers to help orient those parent data leaders. And then the second piece is that there is a webinar series. It has gone on the entire last year, and we just on the 15th, which was last week, one of the webinars was around building effective virtual teams for stakeholder engagement. And so I invite you to check that out because it's posted on the website right now. There were some great resources that you could pick up and implement right away, or at least start planning right away. So stay tuned for more information from DAISY about other things that will be going on and resources to support you with your stakeholder engagement and data use. Next slide, please. In terms of resources to support stakeholder engagement, I certainly let you know about the webinar that was held on engaging virtual stakeholder teams. There's the third bullet on here is expanding your virtual engagement toolbox. So there's a whole piece around different types of technology to engage stakeholders at different levels. So all at the team level, at that core team level, that transforming level, and then also how to actually use different virtual tools to engage stakeholders and engage voices. DAISY also has two additional resources. One is the Stakeholder Knowledge Toolkit, so building knowledge about data. And then the other piece is the Data Culture Toolkit, and that is around supporting state and local data use. And again, your TA liaison can help you as you're looking at how you're engaging stakeholders and understanding data, orienting to the indicators. So DAISY is responding to the state and OSEP needs related to stakeholder engagement and data. Next slide. So the DAISY website holds all of these resources that I have referenced. So please check that out. It's constantly being updated. Again, we're being responsive to your needs and the needs of OSEP. Next slide. And then again, for more information, we also have a Facebook page and Twitter. And so with that, we're going to start with a discussion. The first person to talk will be Lori. Lori Karcher from Wisconsin Family Assistance Center for Education, Training, and Support, otherwise known as Wisconsin Facets. So Lori's going to kick off the discussion today and share, and then we'll talk with two states as well, and then it'll open up for question and answers. So Lori, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. As was said, my name is Lori Karcher, and I am the director of a grant which Wisconsin Facets receives from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. In this position, I work very closely and collaboratively with the special education directors at DPI to meet the grant goals which we set together. Prior to taking on this role, I worked as one of the help desk specialists at Wisconsin Facets, answering calls and questions from families and professionals every day. I am both excited and a tiny bit scared to death to be here today. Since our founding in 1995, Wisconsin Facets has had a vision that all children receive the education that they need to be successful. One of the core values that Wisconsin Facets prides itself on is our steadfast commitment to empowerment. We believe parents are the best experts on their children, and for that reason, we strive to ensure that we are showing families how to gain the knowledge and skills necessary to be confident advocates for their children. Next slide, please. Once families feel confident and comfortable, we encourage them to consider further developing their leadership skills so that they may help support and empower other families to become more involved and ultimately have a positive impact on systems change for future generations. Next slide, please. So odds are good that if you're going to view a presentation from a parent center rep, you may just see a few pictures of their kids. Prior to working at Wisconsin Facets, I was a stay-at-home mom for 16 years with 3 children, the oldest of which is now 21 years old and a recent graduate. Just to clarify, I do not have triplets. These are all pictures of my daughter Eve. She has 2 younger brothers. So, how did I go from being a stay-at-home mom to speaking at a national leadership conference? My mother would say it's because I don't know how to say no. But truly, it all began with my daughter's therapists and teachers. I think there were enough professionals in my life who saw potential in me. So my daughter's elementary special education teacher was what a colleague of mine would call a pleasant, persistent pest. Our school district was looking to recruit a family member as a volunteer parent liaison. This person would work directly with the special ed directors in the district and receive training about different topics within special education to share with other families and act as a liaison between families and the district when needed. The idea was that families might feel more comfortable bringing concerns to another parent if they were not comfortable speaking directly to staff or administration in the district. Well, Eve's teacher, Ms. Lambrin, kept sending home applications in my daughter's backpack with notes encouraging me to apply. So I submitted an application. The district called me in for an interview and I got the position. And no, I was not the only applicant. I asked. From there, I continued to learn and grow in my confidence and skills, and I was able to help other parents. I worked with the special ed directors to start a special ed parent advisory council, and the council members decided together how we wanted that council to operate. As time went on, more families came and participated. Why am I sharing this story? Well, when you're looking to get stakeholders involved, I realized that the thought may be, if I reach out to more people, then I'll likely get a greater response. If I cast a wide net, then I'm going to get a lot more people involved. And that makes sense to some degree. However, the idea of engaging families is about building relationships with them. And so I would encourage you to start small, or at least think about starting small. Reach out to your district level administrators, principals, and educators to seek families to engage and build from there. To me, a personal invitation beats out a flyer every time. Next slide, please. All right, so now that you've got some parents and family members on your committee, council, collaborative, or whatever stakeholder group you've brought together, how do you support them now that they're there so you don't lose them? And more importantly, How do you support them so they are able to meaningfully participate and contribute to your goals? Wisconsin Facets, in collaboration with a large group of stakeholders, including several statewide agencies, school representatives, and family members, developed a resource called Serving on Groups That Make Decisions, a Guide for Families. This guidebook was developed because of an identified need for families to have a better understanding of how formal decision-making groups operate. Many parents may not have any experience participating in meetings that use a specific agenda, timeline, or procedures for voting. If someone doesn't take the time to explain the tools and the protocol, how can you expect meaningful participation? Your new member is just spending most of their time trying to figure out the rules. Next slide, please. So there are 8 modules in the Serving on Groups guidebook. The second module explores and explains 6 different types of groups and their purpose, including governing groups, advisory groups, leadership, planning, evaluation, and practice groups. On the screen is an example slide from the third module on processes groups use, which includes 7 principles of shared decision-making. And the final module in the guidebook gives families, or really anyone, strategies for preparing for, participating in, and following up after a meeting. It also gives tips for how to deal with conflict, which we all know is an important skill to learn. And since we're here today to talk about how to make data more meaningful to families, next slide, please. There is an entire section devoted to understanding data. Aside from the physical guidebook, which you can order on the servingongroups.org website, or you can go to the website and download and print it, there are also online modules for you to view. The data module is the longest out of all of them. We've spent the entire last year updating all of those modules, so we've reviewed all the resources and updated everything for you. Speaking of, each module has a resources section, which has many activities that you can use with your groups. The data module has over 30 resources aside from the actual content that's in the module. As I said, it is the longest of the 8 sections, but it is loaded with great information to help the members of your group understand how decision-making groups use data. Next slide, please. So in order to make data meaningful for families, you may just have to start with the basics. The Understanding Data module covers the stages of data use, from planning and preparing to use data all the way through continuous monitoring for progress and improvement. And it also gives you a template to follow when using the data in the decision-making process. So on the slide, you see an example of the template that you're given in the resource. But along with the blank template, you also will get a sample scenario. So the template is already filled in so that you have a ready-made example to help your group understand how to use the tool. How great is that? Next slide, please. This is actually one of my favorite activities, mostly because of the title, Working with and Understanding Data, also known as Does Working with Data Make You Want to Pull Your Hair Out? Finding ways to make data analysis fun can be very motivating, especially when you're working with families who aren't used to analyzing all of that data. There's even an activity in there that uses M&Ms. Other topics include finding relationships in data, making comparisons, exploring trends, and creating an action plan. So as the volunteer parent liaison for the school district, I was trained using many of the tools in Serving on Groups in the guidebook. However, it was not used as a step-by-step guide as if it were a course in school. The beauty of this resource is that you can pick and choose which sections and activities will be most useful for your group and its members. And as was mentioned, people come in with different levels of understanding of data. You may have some folks that already have a good understanding. So maybe you need to pick a different activity versus somebody who's like, I don't know what a pie graph or a pie chart is. Wisconsin Facets maintains a cadre of trained volunteer parent leaders who are willing to share their knowledge and experience in their local communities. And often these parent leaders will volunteer to host exhibit tables at conferences or events in their local communities or facilitate support groups. We offer specialized training throughout the year to cultivate the leadership skills for these parents. And much of the leadership training comes from the information in the Serving on Groups Guidebook. So our hope is that more and more parents of children with disabilities will find their way onto boards, advisory groups, policy groups, et cetera, in order to partner with professionals to effect meaningful systemic change and to improve the outcomes for all students. My hope is that you will find this to be a useful resource as well in working with your groups. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story, talking about this wonderful resource that you've used, Serving on Groups. And I think we can try to put a link maybe somehow out or share what the link would be to that resource. And I really loved your takeaway that casting a wide net isn't always the way to go, and that doing more targeted, personalized approaching of parents and families can also really be a good way to get stakeholders more involved. And the link is in the handout that everyone has access to as well, to that resource. So now I am very excited to introduce Zelphine Smith-Dixon with the Georgia Department of Education.
So good afternoon, and thank you for having me. And I'm just going to say up front, we're not here this afternoon because it's all perfect and we have it all worked out. We have good practices in place, and we'd like to share those practices with you. However, it is still a work in progress. And so as we move forward and look at the initial slide, I really want to begin today as we move to that next slide and kind of start with really what I like to refer to as a shifting mindset. And so I can't even believe I'm going to say this, but out of the hard work of the State Systemic Improvement Plan, it really grew some phenomenal practices that are still in place today. And so it's like the one thing in life that really was tough for you, that you almost got through it and you didn't want to go back to it, but you had to admit it really moved you to the next level. And so here's one thing we recognize with the State Systemic Improvement Planning process that really required that intense engagement of stakeholders. It became very evident to us that, number one, the leading by convening process is not just this thing on the side, but it is a powerful tool that can be used to engage stakeholders. And every time you begin to tackle or to address a problem, you must approach that problem obviously with solutions. And you have to ask yourself the intentional question, who else cares about this? And so in the state of Georgia, if you might imagine, it was about 2013 or even earlier, we did not have the best graduation rate for students with disabilities. And we would find ourselves in settings or conferences just like this. And it was almost embarrassing to see the state of Georgia's graduation rate for students with disabilities flashed on the screen, represented with others. And I'm going to tell you that forced us to take the work definitely to the next level. We addressed in our state identified measurable result the need to really improve school completion for students with disabilities. When we asked a tough question, who else cares about this? We could not define the role of stakeholders based on compliance. In Georgia, we have a saying that we are not about compliance, we are about compassion. And so I want to answer one question that I've already seen today. And that question really came back to number one, is there a magical target or percent? How do you know that you have engaged enough? Well, you know that you have engaged enough when you're getting the results you need to get. And I'm just going to say up front, it's easy to treat stakeholder engagement like a compliance activity. I can check off that I have the right types of people. I can check off that I have the right numbers. But even when you have the right representation, it doesn't automatically mean that the people you have invited are in a risk-free environment. They have that sense of community and belonging, that they're able to share the information to take you to the next level. So I caution you to think of it more of, am I getting what I need to move the needle forward, as opposed to, do I have the right number? Am I meeting the right target? Do I have the magical next step? And so through using our state identified process, here's what we realized. We recognize that students with disabilities were not graduating, and it had really very little to do with students. And that's the powerful part. Even though we're really focused today on a strong partnership with families, there are no insignificant voices. We heard powerful feedback, not just from families, but from families, from students, from school districts, and the list just goes on and on. Here's what we recognize. We recognize that there was really a lack of understanding of what it meant to be a child with a disability. And I would love to just say to you, if you know one child with a disability, you know absolutely one child with a disability. We quickly recognized that a lot of it came back to the belief system that we had as adults that impacted high expectation for students. And so out of this process, we really grew kind of what we affectionately designed or determined to be a need to shift the mindset and to really move away from just saying our state improvement plan, but really shifting the needle to imagining unlimited possibilities for our students. Next slide. And so let's get down to understanding the why. And as I say this right now, 2020 vision, it feels like it was actually countless years ago, but it really wasn't. We kind of morphed from the work of our state identified plan, and we shifted towards, we want to make sure that we have this common language and common understanding. That's so critical, because I'm just going to say to you, if you are not at the table, you're probably on the menu. And it doesn't happen a lot of times because people are trying to be intentionally not doing the things that they need to do in your best interest, but it is just so easy to make decisions that's not in the best interest of each person when you don't have all of those powerful voices. And so we determined up front, look, why are we doing what we're doing? We're doing it because it's about the whole child. You absolutely heard this messaging this morning. It is not acceptable to talk and to meet 8 hours, 90 minutes, 10 hours, and never talk about what's right for kids. And I'll just say it up front. Sometimes there are things that are right for kids, that are right for families, that aren't comfortable for adults. I know that feels uncomfortable to say it, but it is the absolute truth. And just because it's not comfortable, it doesn't mean that it gives us a permission slip to move forward in a manner that necessarily take care of our needs versus the needs of our students. And so as we're moving on to the next slide. And so here we are continuing to shift the needle, to shift the mindset. Let me just tell you, if you are bringing a compliance mindset to stakeholder engagement, you are going to miss the compassion in this process. So stakeholder engagement is not an event. It is a process. It is not a checkoff of the right number, of the right match. It is really designed to influence and to empower each voice who can contribute to you solving the problem, addressing the opportunity, and taking that work to the next level. And so one type of stakeholder engagement that I am very proud of as a state director is the Special Education State Advisory Panel. You know it because it is a regulatory requirement. That panel must have at least 51% of individuals or families of children with disabilities. And that panel is designed to advise the state director of the unmet needs of the state. And I am telling you, that has been one of my most phenomenal opportunities to engage others and to get feedback and to get the voice. And so the Special Education Advisory Panel, it includes families, it includes individuals. This, for the past 3 years, we've had wonderful representation of at least one student I'm thinking of who had a resounding voice on a number of occasions. We have administrators, we have LEA representatives. And here's the other thing, there has to be that sense of trust and transparency. You have to be very mindful about creating siloed opportunities to get feedback. If it's important to us, it's important to us. If it's the right thing for kids, it's the right thing for kids. And so what I love about the Special Education State Advisory Panel, I have representation across different groups, all sitting in the same place. And I have to ensure that what we are presenting, what we are sharing, that it is user-friendly, so that if you're sitting in that room as a state agency or you're sitting in that room as an individual, you can bring your voice to the table. And so a couple of years ago, we created at the Georgia Department of Education a special education help desk. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because we have to shift our mindset about stakeholder engagement away from compliance to compassion. What does that mean? That means that every interaction with an adult, with a student, with an administrator is an opportunity to get feedback and to engage stakeholders. So what we recognized was the need to create this help desk, an outlet for families, for school districts to reach out to us as the front line people in this particular organization who they can ask anything. You heard me. There are no dumb or stupid questions, right? You can ask us anything and we are there to help you. And the Family Engagement and Dispute Resolution Unit, they do a phenomenal job of de-identifying the information as necessary, but elevating it to a sense of awareness to allow us to make decisions that are in the best interest of our kids, of our families. And so you heard earlier about a parent liaison, and in Georgia, we have a parent mentor partnership. Again, another opportunity by which we partner with our local school districts. We offer personnel supports to be within that school district, but that personnel support belongs to that local school district. We gain invaluable information about what's happening locally, about what families feel and how they feel. Here's what we recognize. We recognize that sometimes families were much more willing to pick up the phone and ask a tough question to another parent who had a child with a disability versus calling me at the State Department as the state director or calling someone even at the local district office. And of course, we have a seamless partnership with our Parent Training Information Center. A representative from the center sits on the Special Education Advisory Panel. And I'm just going to say up front, we had some great partnership efforts in place during school closures and all the way to school restarts. I'm just telling you, I don't think that we would have been as successful as we were to get the message out to families if it were not for this partnership. And so as we are advancing to the next slide, and so here's a twist. I have already seen that question. I hear you are talking about kind of state level stakeholder engagements, but what about local administrators? Remember what I said earlier? There are no small voices. all voices matter. And so for us, we organize lots of that stakeholder engagement by leveraging our strong partnership with our GCASE, our Council of Administrators for Special Education. Again, when I think of school closures and what it actually took for us to get up and going for restart, where would we have gone without our GCASE? We offered across this particular year a series of lunch and learn with the state director. It was phenomenal, even though most days I don't get a chance to eat lunch because the work just goes on and on. But we collected questions and information from our local directors. What is it you need to know more information about? How can we serve you better? And we would take that information and turn it into technical assistance content and give it back out locally and make it available for all of our districts. And it's not just the focus on administrators, our teachers matter as well. And so there is a representative from the department who sits on our local CEC for our state. And so we talk all the time about what we're talking about locally, what the needs are. How do you want to improve the feedback loop for what's happening with teachers? I want to hear your voice. And perhaps the most phenomenal moment, but almost paralyzing moment for me, was when I had conversations about, tell me how we can better address the needs of the teacher pipeline. And a teacher voice said, we need to ensure that the education or the educational career is not dehumanized. So I want you to think about that for a moment. And then also another opportunity comes back to the Special Education Directors Forum. And so that question has been asked, how can we ensure that we are connecting with our local directors, that we are getting their feedback, that we're not just hearing from a state team, but we are also being advised based on what local directors know about the work? Well, we engage with our local directors within regions. We pulled them together to represent that particular region and to give us that feedback. And so next slide. And so I won't talk as long because I know our time is growing near, but I did just want to say that here's probably the thing that you will continue to hear me say over and over and over again. Stakeholder engagement is really about meeting the needs, and it's about focusing on our students. And that engagement allows us the opportunity to use data to tell the story. And that's what's most important. It's never about the numbers. There are students behind those numbers. Next slide. And so if you are asking, how can I get started? We're not perfect, but we are definitely trying to move in the right direction. Here are just a couple of innovative or effective strategies that you can use to address stakeholder engagement. Number one, it comes back to relationships. And you have heard that throughout this entire conference. Make sure that it's not about getting the right people at the table without establishing those relationships. Also, think about the culture that you have for engagement. And I will tell you, it's very easy to collect feedback from people. It's a lot more difficult to close that feedback loop. And so make sure when you create those opportunities to ask people for their voice, that you go back and you tell them how you have used their feedback or not. And sometimes that's a little difficult because people may very well give you feedback that you are unable or unwilling to do something with at that particular moment, but always consider kind of your feedback loop and how you will address it. The last point I'm going to make for today is there must be diversity in your stakeholder engagement process. And so you have your lagging data. We know that because we have affectionately referred to it as autopsy data, right? It's the data, the summative data that you look at after the fact. You have your leading data, but I want to mention another type of data which I refer to as the leaning data. You can only get leaning data through having relationship. And so the leaning data comes when I'm looking into your eyes and we have relationship, and I know that there is something off. I know that there's something different that's happening. And I recognize that we're at the SEA level, but at the very same rate and time, when you're at the local level and you develop those relationships with families, with leaders, with teachers, with students, you don't want to miss that opportunity to lean in and get data that you otherwise would have needed to wait a year, 2 years, or 3 years down the road. So I thank you for this phenomenal opportunity to share some information with you today, and I look forward to answering additional questions.
Great. Thank you, Zelphine. I appreciate that. Next up, we have John Van Overen. I may not have said that right, John. I own that. So I apologize. And he's going to share with us. He is the Part C and Part B 619 data manager from the Minnesota Department of Education. So John, welcome. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And what a hard act to follow up, Zelphine. You have just so much experience and knowledge and really great insight. Here in Minnesota, I'm the data manager guy. So I look at things very much from a data point of view. And I work with my team who very much look at it from much more of a program point of view. But we're really committed to reaching out to stakeholders. Let's go to the first slide here. So in Minnesota, we start every presentation with our 10 commitments to equity. And when we talk about early childhood special ed, a lot of these 10 commitments impact that. One of the big things here is number 6, start early. And we realize that if we really want to improve equity in our program, our early childhood special education programs are one of the keys to success. Also, as we look at it, we also look at go local. And one of the big initiatives in our program is to reach out to our stakeholders in districts and with families throughout the state. If we go to the next slide here, why do we do it? Well, if we don't ask questions, we don't know answers. And data should tell us a story that we need to hear, not the story we want to tell. So one of the things that we realized over the course of this COVID year is that some of our programs aren't as good as we thought they were. And a lot of it came down to looking at how our data was speaking to us internally and how our stakeholders and districts were using it. And we wanted to hear a story of continuous improvement, that we were doing a great job. But when we talked to our stakeholders, we found out that wasn't necessarily the case. If we go to the next slide, because of this, we decided to engage in a new process that we're trying to rebuild our ECSE program to improve the system. Some people internally have called it ECS 2.0, others are just calling reimagining. But what we're doing right now is engaging leaders, practitioners, our ICC and our IEICs, family caregivers, other agency partners like our Department of Health. Unlike many states, we are actually a birth mandate state, which means that our districts are providing our Part C services, not our health department. We've engaged tribal nations. Many states might not have the same level of tribal engagement that's necessary in Minnesota, but that is a big part of our movement forward. Often our tribal nations have been overlooked in our process. We are also reaching out to family advocacy organizations and community liaisons. And we've worked pretty closely with some DAISY technical assistance throughout this last year for both our Part B program and our Part C program. And it's really been quite helpful to get those additional supports from DAISY. So if you haven't looked into DAISY, here's a plug for them. DAISY's been a great partner with us and a great asset. If we go to the next slide, We're starting this process by doing listening sessions. So over the course of the last 6 months, we've engaged in listening sessions with our district leaders. We've engaged in listening sessions with our IEICs. And next, we're going to be starting listening sessions with some of our community stakeholders. In addition to that, we've issued a number of surveys out to districts to try to gather some information in advance of these listening sessions. Along with that, we've also created a core stakeholder group. This is a combination of practitioners and leaders within the districts. I want to apologize. My dog clearly is not happy that I've shut her out of this meeting, and she's making a lot of noise. I'm sorry about this. She's a new puppy, so she's really hard to keep under control. So I apologize for this interruption. So our core stakeholder meeting is a group that we'll keep going back to after our listening sessions to break down the information that we've gathered around the information provided by these listening sessions. And that way they're going to help us recreate our system. We've also reached out in contract for facilitated child and family caregiver engagement. National DAISY TA opportunities. So we've been using the Part B data use cohort to look at how our data is being used in Part B. And also our Part C COVID impact cohort. Now my cat is fighting with my dog. I am so embarrassed. Give me a moment. It's like a perfect storm of at-home presentation. Anyway, our Part B data use cohort, we have been engaging with a number of states on how we use our Part C outcomes data and how to better use it within our with our stakeholders at the district. And it's included in a number of people from across the agency and a parent stakeholder from one of our tribal nations, and also a local ECSE leader to help us get a better grasp about what we want to do with our outcomes data and reporting. And our Part C COVID impact is really looking at what is going to be the long-term impact of COVID in our Part C enrollment. All right, next slide. So what is working? So this is a big question. We're finding out that many of the things that we thought were working weren't. We've gone to item level assessment within our districts using tools like TS Gold to report back to us raw scores for student assessment. And then we were calculating outcomes data. We realized that this was giving us two different sets of data, one from people who were using the classic, what we call manual assessment, where they as a group assessed their students and then came up with their outcome scoring, versus doing a calculation of the assessment data. And we saw some significant difference with outcomes between the two different data sources. And this has really led us to concern, because now we're looking at districts across the state with different data sets. And this is impacting our ability to be able to talk with key stakeholders throughout the state and talk to them at the same level. So that's the what isn't working. How can we do it differently or better? So we have created a dashboard in the state to report back outcomes data to our districts. And through this process, we're finding out what it is that districts really want to use this data for. And oftentimes what we report to the feds, as in outcome data through our SPP APR reporting, isn't necessarily how the districts want to look at that data. And so we're working with our districts to look at how do we refocus the outcome data that we collect for them to use it for internal analysis. And our dashboards are a big key. And as we get more information, we're updating those dashboards to meet our district's needs. And what data is important to programs and families, going along with that same topic. We are looking at the dashboards. We're also looking at how can we engage families better? Because when we look at outcomes data, it's just data. And what does that mean at a family level? And I don't know if we always do a good job at that. I think we do a good job at collecting data. I think we do a decent job at reporting data, but I don't think we always do a great job at giving it meaningfulness to families. And that's why these listening sessions and this reimagining of our program are so important. And what tools do you need to understand the data? And this is where our dashboards come in. And we're really trying to make more interactive dashboards to put out to our key stakeholders so they can play with the data and look at it themselves rather than us feeding them what we want to see from the data. If we move on to the next slide. So what then? So we're identifying some key themes of what, so one of is how are we reporting the data, the item level assessment versus manual entry. We're also noticing that a lot of our key stakeholders feel like in the past that the state has not done a good job listening. And these listening sessions have really opened up a lot of trust and relationship building between the districts and the IEICs and the state. And this is great. We're also looking at areas for professional development. That's a big area. Right now, we have a huge retirement coming down the line of ECSE professionals and teachers that it's going to be hard to fill. We already have a shortage of those teachers. COVID has made a greater shortage as some of them had to leave the system. And now we're having a looming retirement loss. And so what are we going to do with districts to help improve this shortage? And this goes into our CSPD work that we've been doing statewide also. Identify action items, who and how is the best to respond. That's where we're going next. We're not quite there yet. We're almost done with our listening sessions, but really it's about taking action and not just listening. And that's when we're going to build that action plan and strategic plan with our core stakeholder group. We really want this to be a more democratic process where our stakeholders have input on how the system's being set up. And then we also need to look at what resources are needed to make this work. And we as any state have a greater need for resources than the resources we have. But we do have an opportunity with some of the APR funding that's come along to really look at what programs can improve on and use some of this funding to support it. Yeah, so most people will talk the talk and few will walk the walk and be amongst the few. And that is so true. I always like to say it's death by committee, right? And that's what we don't want to see here, is where we talk and talk around the issue and not come up with an action plan in the end, but feel like we accomplish it because we talk so much about it. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is the end of my part of the presentation, but I do want to go and talk about equity for a moment. I meant to talk about it earlier, but my dog is very distracting today. And but one of the major issues around equity, as I said with our 10 commitments to equity, is that Minnesota has the worst achievement gap in the country. Has the worst achievement gap in the country. And as a result, it really points out that we're not doing a good job reaching out to some of our most marginalized communities. And that's something that we're taking to heart while we're doing this listening session, is we really want to look at how we can close the achievement gap within special ed and general ed by addressing these things earlier through ECSE. And we're very sincere in that attempt, and we're hoping that we can get more diverse voices at the table through our listening sessions and our community and parent engagement. But we have a lot of work to do. So I want to thank you all for listening to me go through this and listening to my dog. I'm sure I missed half my notes because of my distraction with the dog, and I really want to apologize. So, but thank you again, and I look forward to answering some of your questions.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you to all of our panelists. I'm glad we got to get a little peek of the dog at one point so we could see who was making that noise. No problems at all. So now we're going to get into our question and answer portion. We've had some questions come in already, so thank you all so much. Keep putting those in. So I'm going to start off. Our first question is, if you could tell us what stakeholder groups you're planning to include and for what purposes. And I think, John, you're going to respond to this. And if you could, we did have a question about how you are approaching tribal leaders and getting them interested in working with you. So if you want to speak to that a little as well.
Certainly. So what we've done with so the question's first to me, right? I just put my dog outside so she wouldn't.
Sorry, yes.
So what we're doing to engage tribal leaders is our Part C coordinator, Kat Taminga, has actually joined a group called the Dream Catchers, and is talking with this team of tribal leaders throughout the state about what impact early childhood special ed could have on the community, and why. Because there's a great distrust throughout the state with our tribal communities with public education, rightfully so, as many people have learned about the schools in Canada and some of the injustice that happened there. And in the US, I think that information is going to be coming out soon too as a result. But there's a lot of mistrust within the public school system in the state, and how to build that relationship and gain more trust. Many of our tribal nations, kids are not being identified during ECSE. They are being identified when they enter kindergarten. And quite frankly, that's too late for us. We want to be able to address many of these concerns before the kids even enter K-12. And I think Kat's doing a great job reaching out and communicating with the tribal community. And as a result, we're looking at how we can change our communication to them through our IEICs.
Thanks, John. I think it's important where you're emphasizing building those relationships and using other organizations to help build relationships with groups that you haven't typically been able to successfully outreach to. So thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm. John, the second part of Amy's question was, are there specific, like which stakeholder groups or representatives are you planning to include and for what purpose?
Right. So first off, we really went to leaders and practitioners in the beginning because this is a group that we've often dictated to and didn't hear from. And they're the ones who are closest to the students and have the most information about what's happening within districts. And since we are a local control state, there's only so much that we can truly understand of what's policy decision making is going on within a community. Next, we also have talked with our professional development facilitators. They're the ones who work in a regional setting to help train teachers and new techniques, support them when they're struggling perhaps with a certain issue within the pedagogical issue. And then we're also reaching out to our IEICs, which are mostly parents and community members. And next, we are identifying key stakeholder community groups that can meet some of those voices that are not being heard from members of our BIPOC community. We, like I said, Kat has reached out and is working with some of our tribal communities, but I think we need to expand that, and we have identified that, and now we're working to reach out to those groups.
And John, can you remind me what IEIC stands for?
Right? Oh my gosh, Kat's going to kill me because I just refer to them by that name, but they are our regional parent coordinating groups. Okay. So each group has a representative that they send to our ICC.
Okay, great.
And to talk about what it is that's important in their region, what's going on, and then to provide feedback to the state from a parent point of view.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Okay, so the next question is about how you're finding these diverse stakeholders who typically haven't been involved. And that question is going to go to Zelphine. And I just do want to chime in too. also kind of addressing the question to John about tribal leaders is really trying to explore within your SEA as well, who has relationships already with some of these groups. For example, for tribal representatives, maybe your Title VI office, so the title offices and just general education is always a good spot to go to, I think, for help with diverse stakeholders. So Zelphine, would you like to?
Sure. I was just looking at a question that came through that was actually very similar to that. But one kind of particular area, for example, we're continuing to address dropout rate for students with disabilities. And I think kind of the powerful ask of the new performance plan package is to ensure that you are hearing from the voices that gave you the data. And so I think it's very easy to have a check off to say, I've asked families or districts, but it's a lot more intentional and with integrity to be able to say, I know the portions of the state or the regions or the districts or the schools that gave me this particular data. And I want to learn more information about who they are, why we have the data we have, and not to make those assumptions. And so I wish I could say it's going to be kind of an easy ask from the state level, but it really isn't. Georgia is a large state and a diverse state, and it will require a kind of seamless partnership between the state and the local school districts to kind of facilitate some of those questions, some of those answers, and to get to the root cause of what is it we need to do differently to address some opportunities across the state.
Great. Thank you, Zelphine, for that. I think there's a question in the chat which relates to some of the topics we've been addressing in the last 5 minutes, which is looking at the difference between a token stakeholder who sits at the table versus a stakeholder that has input and potential influence on decision making. And I'll throw it to anyone, but I want to first say the theme that I heard across Lori, John, and Zelphine was that this really is a different way of thinking. And I think that you heard that loud and clear from our panelists to really look at, I think it was Zelphine who said there's some risk taking involved, right? So it's a risk, and it also requires you to think differently, and it's not a checklist for compliance. So I don't know if anyone wants to talk a little bit about that.
I can pick up on that a little bit. So I think that when you're engaging stakeholders, you have to think about it from the beginning about what your expectations are from them. So if you're looking to check a box and say we have a parent at a meeting, then you've accomplished your goal if they're there, right? But if you take some time and invest in them, first of all, I talked about, the personal ask is great, but if you want to send out a flyer that says we're inviting you to our meeting, you should be clear about what it is you're inviting them to. Give them some description of what it is you're engaging them in. Give them a reason to want to be there. Most of our families are involved because of their children, so they have a personal investment, and I've heard people talk about that. So you have to figure out that personal investment or like what your goal is to get them involved. And then you have to develop that. It keeps coming back to relationships, but giving them the tools that they need, like I talked about earlier, and helping them understand the process, helping them understand what is their commitment level. If you say, I want you to be a part of this parent advisory council, and is that council going to meet once a week? Is it going to meet 3 times a year? And then, like Zelphine talked about, coming in back and closing that loop, that feedback loop. So just as an example, I was involved in several different committees or meetings where they would have a community cafe, right? So the community cafe, and they're getting input from a bunch of different people in the community. But then after that 2-hour meeting that we spent talking about all of these great things that we want to do, I never received any follow-up after that to find out what happened with the input that we were giving. So I reached back out to the people that were doing the meetings and said, what did you do with that? That was a year ago. You know, what did you do with that input? And they said, oh, we were using that to do our 5-year plan. But I didn't know that. And I spent 2 hours of my time in that meeting. So I think that you have to consider, you know, what it is you're asking of people, truly take into consideration what they're telling you. And then honestly, you know, when you're asking for feedback from families or from anybody, really, you have to be willing and able to have the difficult conversations that may come up. Because, you know, for our families, this is personal. This is about their kids. Yes, we're looking at a global, you know, we want to do systemic change, but for them, it's personal. Those are just some of my thoughts on it.
Awesome. And I wanted to just kind of piggyback on what she just said. And so the difference between a stakeholder who is considered to be a token versus a stakeholder who has really a meaningful input, the difference is going to be you. You are going to be the difference maker. And I'm just going to say you have to put as much energy in making stakeholder engagement measurable, tangible, accountable as you would the it. And so when you're thinking about, when I'm thinking about how to engage stakeholders to move the needle for dropout, I can't only talk about fidelity for what happens with the kids for dropout. I also have to have tangible, measurable expectations for what will stakeholder engagement look like? What is the baseline for stakeholder engagement? How will I know it's getting better? How will we have consensus for what the expectations are and the norms are? How will I know that I need to adjust? And so you heard me say initially it's hard work, and it is hard work because it takes lots of efforts to be able to determine that you're going in the right direction. So you are going to be the difference maker to shift it from being a token or compliance to compassion and meaningful input.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I think we do, in Minnesota, we don't do a great job with that, to be honest. That's part of our rethinking. Somebody put in the questions and comments here about stipends. I think it was from Washington State. And I think that's the key to really getting true stakeholders, because currently, and this is what I've seen across the board in every area when we've reached out to stakeholders, regardless of grade level or program, you get the same voices at the table. And oftentimes they're white middle class, upper middle class moms. And I don't mean that as disparaging to that population, but typically they have the privilege to be able to do that. And I think that's a big reason why things like the achievement gap in Minnesota doesn't get closed, is because we don't provide the funding necessary to get those voices at the table. When you're working a job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs to feed your family, it's not very easy to come and join a voluntary group to provide your feedback. And I think that's a real shortcoming that we need to take a look at in our state.
I like how you all just gave some real practical advice for states as they're approaching this. So I think we're going to be heading into a wrap up since there's only a couple of minutes left. But again, I think it was a question, you know, of being able to really put forth like the changes in you, how you approach it. And Lori being really clear about making sure you're orienting to what the ask is. And then John really saying we haven't done a good job, which is why we're doing the rethink. So I think what this does tell me is that we don't have this all figured out yet. And we know different suggestions and things we can do, but we're all learning. We don't have the magic pill or bullet for this to happen. So Amy?
Yeah, great. Well, we're just about at time. So thank you all for listening today and hearing our stories and strategies. And thank you for the panel. And hopefully everyone got something out of this, some little tidbit or strategy that you can try, something to think about and consider. Hopefully the resources we mentioned also will be useful to you. And there's a handout from our session that I know will be posted in the resources section, I believe, hopefully later today for you all to access, along with our contact information. So unfortunately, we didn't get to everyone's questions, but thank you. They were some really great questions. And please reach out to any of us directly, and we can definitely have further conversation and try to address any other questions you might have or more information that you're looking for. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you for spending time with us today.